I think actually, okay, a little bit of an awkward button press with our streaming solution there. But hello to IT professionals and MSP owners viewing today. I'm going live with Joe Ferla of Enable fame to chat about cloud solutions, cloud benefits, challenges. I don't know, all kinds of stuff. I'm excited for it. Joe, could you give the folks tuning in a quick intro to who you are and what you're up to?
Yeah, so again, my name's Joe. I'm one of the head nerds here at Enable. I've been here for about 6 years. Spent about the past two in the head nerd role, and I support our RMM solutions, Cloud Commander, if you're familiar, Mac, operational efficiency, and then pretty much everything else in the cloud for Enable here as a head nerd.
Awesome. So a little bit of everything.
Yeah,
Of course, we're going to be talking about cloud today, and specifically, I guess, some benefits and perhaps challenges, but also some other pieces like security and educating users. Um, I think, Joe, we just get right into it. Cloud's been kind of the very controversial word in some ways, but also the buzzword of the past decade, perhaps.
right. So yeah, I think especially over the past like 5 years, the MSPs have been in just a great place with the evolution of the cloud, right? While it's a little bit different of an environment for us, and while it's a little bit of a different place for us to sit, we're the industry that's been offering remote support forever, right? So for us, while the cloud brings on some challenges and it brings some benefits for us, right? We're seeing MSPs more and more moving to the cloud because it's not much different than what we've been doing. We just have some wrinkles we have to adapt to, right? We just have some environmental factors we have to adapt to. And we're learning now, especially after COVID, when we in the MSP space took like what, 70% of the workforce and moved them remote. Small to medium enterprise businesses, they now really need us because their internal IT support is not used to handling anything like this. So, you know, I hear buzzword with the cloud, right? And whenever I hear buzzword, for some reason, it always sounds negative to me, right? What I really hear is like, this is one of our opportunities, right? This is like fully managed coming back around.
Yeah, yeah, of course, and no shade meant by by buzzword. Yeah, I really love that statistic too. The what was it, 70% of workforce moving remote? Is that within
Yeah.
MSPs or businesses as a whole?
Well, so where I picked it up from was actually a conversation with David Weeks, and when he's giving, if you guys haven't seen it, his Red Ocean Blue Ocean talk, pick it up at a conference. Um, that was a statistic that he had in his, and he was not saying that it was 70% of MSPs were moving their end users remote. He was saying 70% of the workforce has moved remote, and MSPs are largely responsible for that, right? Because think about COVID. I mean, were you working in an office or at home during COVID? Your coworkers, they were all at
Sure.
home too, right?
Yeah.
We pushed that. Um,
Yeah, it's a I guess not miracle, but a good thing that MSPs were, as you were alluding to, around to kind of support some of this move. Of course, our bingo card for COVID, we can punch that one off, but I think that was certainly, obviously, the largest factor in
mhm.
this like massive ramp up to rolling out cloud. But I'm curious, Joe. Maybe we could chat a little bit about kind of some of the challenges of moving some of these small to medium sized businesses or even enterprise, if you'd like, to the cloud. I know it's was kind of sudden influx.
Right. Well, so I when I think about challenges moving to the cloud, the first thing that always comes to my head, especially as an MSP, is accessibility, right? Because as an MSP, even before COVID, what were we really selling? Right? It was productivity and peace of mind through cybersecurity. Right? We're not really selling tech. what I mean by that is like I understand that we're selling EDRs or management software, take control software, all of that, but what we're really doing for our end users is making sure that they're up 24/7 to be able to generate revenue. So when I look at this move to the cloud and even in my own MSP, I was making this move to the cloud. The first thing that got me was just sheer accessibility, right? I get that I'm putting somebody remote, but now every business that I work with has to have a properly set up VPN. Every end user that I work with, their environment's going to have to be vetted a little bit for me to comfortably manage them, right? Because they're taking that work laptop home. I've now got to address, who has access to this, who's going to be on this device, or if it is something where I'm putting them fully into the cloud, right? Like, where are my access points going to be, right? What am I going to be giving permissions wise where, right? Who's going to have access to this database? Who's going to have access to this device, right? And it just becomes a logistical nightmare of, did my tried and true security practices work? Which the answer is probably categorically no. Um, right? How
No,
do I evolve?
100%.
Right. Like the shift from managed antivirus to EDR. I don't know how much you saw of this pre-COVID, right? Coming from Enable, working as a partner success manager, right? During part of COVID, the amount of folks that pre-COVID, I was like, we need to talk EDR. And they're like, nah, Bitdefender will work for me. 2 days later, they're sitting on the phone going, dude, I should have signed up for this months ago. Like, I need training, I need product, I need everything. And whether or not they were going through Enable, which I don't care about because I am the nerd, I don't have to sell.
Of
Thank you.
course.
Um, it was this huge move for us. I also look at accessibility with what end users now have access to when they're in the cloud, right? And I look at a large group of people whom we have as MSPs have had to educate, right? I always make the joke, like, I teach as an MSP, I taught somebody to right click on a weekly basis, right? But that's tech support. How many times have you had to, in the middle of a support call, educate while you're doing this? And that that's also a huge piece of this, I feel like, in my mind. So, kind of going down a quick
Yeah,
list of challenges.
that education prong, right?
Education, I think, was one of the
Huge.
largest, right? Because we're now putting people in a world of, especially in small to medium businesses with owners that are entrepreneurs, right? Most entrepreneurs are 45 and up, right? So we're dealing with a set of folks that, while a lot of MSPs are of that generation, right? They're the ones who grew up in it, right? They were the gamers back in the day, right? They were the folks who understood tech. I as an MSP would have somebody call in, my computer's not working. Is it plugged in? We've all made that joke before, but it really happens. The first time it happened to me in the real world, I tried to record it because I didn't think it was actually happening. Um, so educating people how to have the same abilities and the same day-to-day workflows in a brand new environment is just incredibly difficult, right? Um, I I played a lot of lacrosse and hockey as a kid. The way I described it to MSPs was like, they're the same thing-ish. One's on the ground, one's in the air. It takes a year to learn a new skill set, even though they're complementary. Um, and it's just
For
it's a
sure.
different place to sit.
Yeah, and how are you seeing MSPs adapt to user education? What's like some actual concrete ways to tackle that?
Well, so when I was an MSP, and I've seen a lot of other MSPs do this as well, it's built in to their packages where I would charge by user, not by device, right? Because by device with stuff in the cloud, end users are going to realize those devices are almost disposable. Why would I pay you to manage something I can throw away and spin up in 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm managing users. And what I would do is I would tack on to each user's cost 5% more for my pre-COVID pricing. And that would give me enough to provide anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half of education a month to my users. And we would do a lunch and learn, right? I'd come in with like, they would supply lunch for all of their employees, be them remote or on site, because I worked with veterinary practices, so they still had to have kind of on site as well. Um, and what we would do is 45 minutes of email security, 45 minutes of, you know, general general best behaviors on the internet, right? An hour and a half of password management, and this is why we have this tool, right? And how to use their password management tool. Um, you know, I did one with one of the organizations. It was 45 minutes of how to properly clone a device in the Azure cloud, why they need to have this ability, specifically because of information that they had to keep, as well as how they were utilizing their virtual devices. So I needed some end user interaction there, but then also once they've cloned that device and they've got it spun up, how to go through and make sure that EDR is properly functioning with your firewall and your device rules, right? How are you going to make sure that you've properly connected to AD? How are you going to make sure that your users have the proper limited access and the like? Um,
Yeah, that's such an awesome tactic. I think the lunch and learn approach, and definitely well needed. Also, really enjoyed how you talked about just kind of bumping up the cost to account for that. That seems like a really good strategy as well.
so the thing I think of, again, going back to what are we selling as MSPs, we're selling productivity and peace of mind through cybersecurity. When I was selling as an MSP, I wasn't selling, I wasn't again selling tech or myself. What I was selling was bottom line revenue to the end user. So, say for instance, I would look at patch management. And if one of their patch pain points was patch management in the sales process, right? Where they're saying, every Friday I've got at least 30 minutes where devices are popping up and down, right? I can come in and say, all right, first off, I'll give you control over the reboot. Secondly, I'm going to make sure that your devices are patched outside of work time. That's how many minutes per employee. What's your fully burdened labor cost per employee, right? Or what's your revenue per hour per employee? I'm saving you this much money. Here's how within the first quarter of being with me, you're already earning back that investment, right? And patching might be a bad one, right? Slowdowns during backups, right? With servers taking excessive time to back up, right? If I have a solution that can solve that problem, I'm selling that time back to you.
Yeah. I know this isn't a sales conversation per se, or maybe it is. But Joe, I think there's a lot of quotes I think of. There's like, what is it? Sell the sizzle rather than the steak. And
Yeah.
another one just about in general creating value. When you're able to kind of quantify that additional revenue being brought in or revenue being saved and being tied into that, I think is a great way to illustrate that value and really kind of close more deals.
Well, yeah, and then two, kind of tying this back into the cloud, right? What that sets you up for in the sales process is that you're not an insurance plan. You are a valued member of their team and a revenue driver in their team, which sets you up very consultatively. So when you have to have this conversation with a business that may be very much stuck in the mud of I don't want to evolve tech, you can attack this from that consultative side of it to get them to the cloud, right? To kind of give a funny anecdote, I think from my time, right? Veterinary practices are very cheap. If you could imagine having to have the same amount of equipment as a small hospital, but like tenth of the revenue, you have to be. So we
Yeah,
had,
different incentives.
right?
Like somebody
So
else is paying.
yeah, one, somebody else is paying, and two, they don't have insurance backing them. right? So when I look at X-ray machine management, I also worked in the veterinary technician field. So I had included in my services surgery equipment management, right? Lab equipment, but X-ray machines. If I walked into a vet's office and they had an X-ray machine that was newer than 1995, we were doing great. So one of the challenges I had to come up with is, why are you guys keeping piles of film in your office? Right? Can we just go so far as to scan as many of these as we can and throw them up to the cloud so you can maintain compliancy, right? But also, you don't have to worry about film taking up, a storage room in your office, right? Um, so attacking that from a insurance provider role, that's a lot of money you're asking them to spend. That's a lot of changes to their process you're asking them to perform. But coming at it from the consultant method, right? The office manager of that particular hospital like goes, "Okay, prove to me I should do this." Right? And what I simply did was, here's how quickly I can restore this database server and keep you compliant for as long as possible. And she just goes, "Okay, solve my problem then." Right? So it became
Nice.
very, very easy to generate revenue as an MSP, but also get your clients into the proper technology sets they needed to be. And typically that's the cloud nowadays.
Yeah, I really love that anecdote about the X-ray films specifically. That kind of to me shows, going above and beyond, and not just answering questions on like, oh yeah, we can do X, Y, or Z that they may ask, but making suggestions and looking at some of these business processes. I
Hmm.
think it's super valuable.
Yeah. So
Cool. So y- go for it.
no.
Yeah, I was going to say we've covered a little bit about accessibility, right? That
Hmm.
the cloud has brought on and some challenges. Of course, VPNs are needed most everywhere. Users are remote. Um, I think we should perhaps talk a little bit on security angle,
Hmm.
um, and a lot of that might tie in with this accessibility thing. Once you have users, bringing laptops home onto these, networks that aren't controlled by the MSP. Um, Joe, in your opinion, what's been the, I guess, largest challenge within cloud security for MSPs the past few years?
I think the largest challenge outside of making sure that the end device is well protected is, how do you make sure your data is properly protected? And then how do you make sure that the rights and privileges that users you have in the cloud are properly set, right? I I come at this from the Microsoft side. I know you come from the AWS side, right?
Sure.
But setting up on the Microsoft half just the roles and permissions I want my users to have in the cloud is a bear,
Yeah,
right?
same for AWS, IAM.
Like,
Incredibly complicated.
w- we are forcing tools that were supposed to be single tenant and tenant managed to be multi-tenant and user management. And it it's just a challenge, right? I can't tell you how much time I spent going through, and this was at a vet practice. I couldn't even imagine doing this for a lawyer's office. We're doing this for a small to medium enterprise business where you do have a suite, VPs, directors, right? And then all of your departments that need conditional access to certain things, right? I had 4 tiers of people that I had to deal with, right? And it was still such a pain. So I think as MSPs, the securing of the device is is the easy part. It's the accessibility to the data in the cloud and maintaining compliancy items and maintaining or compliancy standards, and then also maintaining people's ability to do their job. And it also kind of goes back to education as well. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a business owner and told him, like, I'm not giving you access to the credit cards, right? There's going to be an office manager and reception that has access to that information. Well, I'm the business owner. I need it. No, you don't. I haven't seen you take a payment ever. And I worked with you from 16 to
Sure.
20, right? I barely even saw you in the office. You're not getting that. And explaining to people and educating people on how that least privilege access, for lack of a better term, needs to work inside their org. But
Yeah,
uh,
we have a comment here. Is that where you're eyeing?
yeah, I was
From
going to say we have a
Andrew.
question.
Yeah, so Andrew says, I work for an MSP that is mostly a Google shop, seller of workspace, GCP, etc. How normal is it for a MSP to have nearly zero security controls over their client devices? And then follow up, example, my Windows laptop has zero software control from my sysadmins. No SCCM, no MDM, nothing. I have admin privileges, no BitLocker. The only good thing I see is they use Okta for access to my workspace.
Um, that would that kind of strikes me as really odd to have zero security controls over your client's devices. Um, I kind of say that's odd because one of the things I think of as being an MSP is they're paying us for productivity and peace of mind. They're paying us to take that liability off of them, right? That's part of what being an MSP is. It's part of why whenever we send or whenever I talk contracts with anybody here at Enable, I'm like, dude, you get your lawyer to look over this 3 times. Don't take anything I say for granted because we're telling folks we're going to keep them protected. We're in our contracts stating what we're going to do to keep them protected and up and running. To have zero access, that's a client that I'm going to have a conversation with about you're hamstringing me from doing my job properly, but also understand what you're paying me to do. You're paying me to take this off your plate, right? You're paying me to be the one who handles this. Now, Andrew, this may be a unique situation, right? Where we're looking at a client that's not fully managed, right? Maybe we're doing patch. Maybe we're just doing backup, right? Maybe we're just doing take control, right? Maybe this is a co-managed situation where you truly are a la carte.
A
But in
little more
this,
context here.
yeah,
Sorry. To clarify, I'm a worker for MSP. This scenario is on my MSP given laptop. We do not work with client machines.
ah,
I think
um,
internal to the MSP. Kind of made a
ooh,
RMM for the MSP, perhaps.
yeah, okay, so that becomes a really fun answer here as well, where I would think that working for an MSP, I need to have some flexibility on my device, right? But I think it needs to be conditionally given. So, for instance, like Andrew, when you say you have admin privileges but no BitLocker, right? If that's saying your device doesn't have BitLocker enabled, we probably need to have the ability or BitLocker enabled, right? But working for an MSP, I would think that you have a very strict hierarchy you have to follow. But the other thing I've seen working at MSPs is there's a bunch of intelligent people working at an MSP, and at any given point in time, especially in the tech support and engineering side of the house, you guys are building and testing a lot of stuff. I don't want my engineers having the capability to test that brand new PowerShell script on their own laptop, right? Uh, Funnily enough, Enable just restricted us like that as well.
Ah,
Because they
nice.
found out some of us who write PowerShell were testing on our work devices. But
Go test and prod.
admin privileges for me are
Oh, yeah.
granted by using a different account. If I want to try software.exe that requires an evaluation or an elevation, I will use admin. Yeah, I definitely think that's a reasonable idea, where you look at account-based privileges and it makes it a little bit easier to monitor where, you have your traditional user and you have your admin user. That's something similar to what Enable's done with it. Um, but I would still think it's odd to have zero software control, right? Zero security control over a device as an employee of an MSP, just because I think of how are you going to learn, right? How are you going to ensure your best practices? But
Sure.
that
Have a
becomes
template to follow,
yeah,
perhaps, to roll out. Yeah. Yeah, I think you made some good points, Joe. For initially, we thought this was over client machines, which we kind of got into the
yeah.
security discussion of selling them basically reassurance and comfort that their bases are covered on the cybersecurity angle. But then, yeah, going back to more comments from Andrew, I've been thinking about this problem and wondering if something like just in time implemented would alleviate admin access issue.
It very well could. In honesty, this would be more of a conversation. I think, like if we're having this with your business owners of here's what I do on my day to day, here's what I need access to. Do we need something like JIT implemented? Do I need something like, say, uh, uh, administrator access the application? Right, I've got it here on my device from Enable. It's called admin by request, similar to just in time, but maybe a little bit more towards the enterprise level. Um, where I have heavily regulated access on my work device until I use that tool. That might be something to look at too. That'd probably be where I'd lean. But, some things I would look at, like if you can't install an app on your device, right, that might be a little bit too heavy-handed, especially in the tech support side of the house, which I'm assuming you're in.
Um, Sounds like perhaps kind of a middle ground between
Yeah.
having enough access, but also enough I don't know, freedom or some controls in place
Mhm.
would be helpful. And we could talk about security all afternoon. I guess kind of I don't want to boil this down to a TLDR, but we talked about some of those large challenges. Being of course in user devices, being in these uncontrolled networks, data and data access and compliance being a huge challenge. The complexity of just permissions. I
Mhm.
think we were getting into a little bit before we got into some user questions there. Andrew saying thanks. Want to make sure I wasn't being crazy. Uh, maybe we'll flash Joe's email at the end.
Yeah.
but um, but anyway, yeah. Again, that's kind of our. I don't want to say TLDR, but maybe we could talk like antidotes or mitigation. How do we tackle these issues?
So I think when we're looking at things like user management and that kind of deal, right? We're looking at pieces of automation, or at least that's what I was looking at, right? I was looking at PowerShell as my saving grace here, right? But that opens up a slew of security concerns, right? The more, and again, coming from the Microsoft side of the house, the more I'm interacting with the Microsoft Graph API to accomplish things inside my dashboard via PowerShell, right? The more I'm opening up problems somewhere else, right? Um, Especially if we have really savvy end users. So looking at what we see like management tools around, right? You can see, like I was at NerdioCon, right? Nerdio was talking to me about some of the stuff that they're looking at doing with cloud management and user management and that kind of deal. To kind of toot our own horn, Enable's got a product, Cloud Commander, that is Entra, Intune, Azure, and M365 management, right? But again, I'm not selling Enable, so please don't blame me
But
there.
if
But
you want, there's the banner.
finding you a management tool, and there's plenty of them out there, right? That can help bring everything in, because I think when we look at solutions, even if we're looking at PowerShell as a solution, we're running into the challenge of just sheer time management inside the cloud, right? If I've got 100 partners as an MSP and 99 of them are in the cloud, that's 99 different portals that I'm going to have to be in minimum, right? That's 99 sets of things that I'm going to have to be aware of as I'm onboarding clientele, as I'm applying policies across my groups or my users, setting up proper access, right? Setting up conditional access inside the Microsoft side of the house is just a pain. Right. And if anybody has scripted that, or you were crazy enough to try and do it like I was, you should be beatified. Call the Vatican, you get beatified just for patience, because it's nigh impossible. It got to the point where I was no longer using PowerShell to interact with the Graph API. I was throwing PowerShell on top of Python so I would have an actual interface to work with. And while there are some MSPs out there that could support application development like that, the vast majority of us are, you know, 1 to 10 engineers, right? We can't support app development like that. So when, we look at solutions, I I think there's a lot of them out there, but I think the big thing that we need to be looking at is what are we doing with our time and how are we properly managing it? And how do you combat that with a third party tool? And I know that's a very vague answer where we may be looking for you know, specific plugs to I want to apply this set of permissions across an organization, but there's not a simple answer to that. There's not a, well, here's the 5 buttons you're going to click, right? I I don't know how AWS is so much with this, but like I look at things with Microsoft, even if I had that silver bullet, right? Go sign into the partner center, go to users, and you want to set up multi-factor authentication, go to security, go to MFA, force enablement, give it a week. It's going to change because Microsoft has changed everything so often. So I look at these third-party tools as the solution because they're not changing all the time. They can't afford to, right? They need user familiarity, and they're taking over that kind of time management crux, if you will, right? Because they're automating it for you.
Yeah, wow, that's a really awesome insight. I hadn't thought about. I just want to go back to. So these third-party tools are not changing all the time because they can't afford to. They need user familiarity for time management. Man, that's pretty awesome.
Well,
Could you give us a specific example of maybe
yeah,
one
okay.
you?
So like
Uh,
I look at, let's say for instance, I focus on Cloud Commander because I work in it on the daily, right? Let's say as an MSP, I've purchased Cloud Commander, and what I want to do is standardize onboarding across all of my organizations. I can set up using the Power Automate connector, a nice template to do that. And then inside the platform, I will have a very specific action that I'm going to take place. Have a standardized SOP built off of it so that all of my technicians are doing this the same way. And I'm going to have that kind of efficiency built into my business so that I have a scalable and repeatable action that's able to be utilized across organizations. And I think across organizations is the key here. These third party tools that are built for MSPs can't afford to change because it's client retention. The more you change, the more we have to adapt as MSPs, the more work you're giving us, right? So I look at keeping that standardized, right? Both from the MSP side and from the vendor side, because we can't afford to let an MSP have to learn something new each week. Whereas we look at Microsoft, or we look at Amazon, or we look at all of these major players in the tech market, they're building product primarily for enterprise level, the IBMs, the Ciscos, all of this, right? That stuff can change. because IBM has a team, not one person, an entire team that's just learned Microsoft and educate on it, right? You can shift for them because that team can quickly and easily disperse that information. Whereas at an MSP, right, how many of us knew Entra was happening the day they announced Entra was happening? It took me 2 weeks before I heard about it because I didn't have the time. So my product that I'm using can't shift that fast. Otherwise, I'm going to leave them, right? And we'll MS for everything problem-wise that we can talk about a vendor working with MSPs, one of the things I think that MSPs are really good at in a positive fashion, I mean nothing negative by this, is you speak with your wallets a lot. We do, right? And we'll quickly tell a vendor they're wrong. And from the vendor side of it, that's very damaging. So we have to be stable because we can't afford not to, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, so many good insights there, and I think I certainly have experienced and seen a lot of these with yeah, just MSPs and the small to medium sized businesses. Like you said, we're not enterprise scale and have the same resources to dedicate. So you definitely get that efficiency and kind of I don't know bluntness you mentioned of telling a vendor. That's a way to put it politely, I suppose.
Right.
Um,
And I think one of the things too, when we kind of talk about interacting with vendors, and I swear to God, we'll get back to the cloud, folks, is when I'm dealing with an enterprise level business as a vendor, I'm bending around them. So when I'm Microsoft, say I am Microsoft and I'm working a deal with IBM. IBM's not bending around me. They're the same size, right? We're working together on this 100%. And I think with MSPs, a lot of organizations, and I'm not saying Enable is blameless here. I think every vendor in the space has done this and learned you you treat your customer base as an enterprise account, right? Because let's be honest, all of Enable's probably the size of Microsoft's IBM account, right?
sure.
Um, and listen. So, but anywho, off of my soapbox of MSPs and
Yeah,
interacting
no,
with vendors.
great side quest, I think.
Uh,
Cool. We've hit a few bullet points, Joe, on the cloud that I'm really enjoying and getting some good comments. Just Jaden agreeing through our conversation on vendors. But and then Andrew just a moment ago, not sure if you covered this before. Are you seeing companies starting to leave the cloud and do more of a hybrid environment? If so, what's causing this? Cost, knowledge, or something else?
so yes, I mean the answer is yes, right? Because the cloud for so long became a buzz, right? Like it became the it thing to do, right? And I think what everybody's learning from enterprise down to the smallest mom and pop is that the cloud is there for a reason, but it's not for everyone, right? So I see companies starting to go back to more of a hybrid environment or even more of a physical environment. And I don't think it's costs that are causing it because I think costs are one of the primary benefits for being in the cloud, right? Sure, we have the management time. Sure, we have the cost of management. Sure, you have the cost of labor. Sure, you have the cost of just dealing with the cloud, but it's still cheaper than dealing with physical devices, I think, in the long run, right? At least it was for me as an MSP. But
Yeah,
and knowledge could also be a reason, right? You're in a new playground. You got to learn the new playground, and that's difficult. Eventually, you're going to fall back to where you're familiar. I think more than that, what we're realizing is there's places where the cloud is good, and there's places where it's not. So, like, we were talking earlier about I had to learn GCC or M365 GCC high and DoD regulations and rule sets, right? If I was in that environment, where I'm managing it as an MSP, a DoD account that has to comply with that, I'm not putting anything in the cloud. It's too much. It's too much management, right? If I'm managing a lawyer's office, right, a lot of it's going to be physical just because I don't want to have to deal with maintaining and preventing risk for a client that has to deal with a high-end compliancy or very complex compliancy where a lot of the solution could just be put a physical server on site and that's where your database lives. Right? So I think what we're seeing now is that folks have learned what we can do in the cloud as MSPs and ITSPs, and we're learning that it's an exceptional tool to have, but it's not a blanket solution, right? It's not something like an RMM where RMMs are just a blanket tool, right? It's when I was an MSP, I had multiple ways of multiple backup vendors for varying clientele's needs, right? So I think that's where the biggest shift is coming in.
Yeah, great points. And there's a lot of them. I'll give just a little bit of input from not MSP side, but in general. I think you put it really well, Joe. That uh, cloud is not. Let me get the exact quote. There's places where cloud is good and where it's not, and it's. I think like any other technology decision, looking at use cases and trade-offs. But something interesting I've been seeing is particularly this guy David Heinemeier Hansen, which maybe some folks are familiar with. He made this programming language Ruby on Rails, and he's a bit of a jerk, but he goes on these rants on how they had just moved their company from cloud to completely on prem. Now they're not a huge company. I think they do 5 or 10 million in revenue. But it's been really interesting to see the kind of discourse around that conversation because for him it was like, oh, we're saving all this money moving from cloud to on-prem. It's actually way more valuable for us. And one other thing I'll add, I was having a discussion around this same guy DHH. He's called with somebody who does hiring at a tech company, and they made a great point that not only do you have to have different people to have skill sets for each of these on-prem or cloud management, but you also have to perhaps have people that can hire those people and know what to look for. So there's just like layers of complexity a little bit. Um, yeah, so that's that's my kind of rant. I
Right?
think it's
Uh,
interesting.
I so I lucked out when I had my MSP in that I was a single man shop. I was also working at Enable while I ran my MSP. So I kept everything purposely very small scale. Um, yeah, again, I was only like 300 devices, but I could not imagine the stress that would come with hiring my first technician, much less the stress that would come with hiring a cloud security expert and an on-prem security expert to run a SOC at the same time. I could not imagine that. So I think
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun.
hiring hits a big nail on the head. Um, and then I think Jaden hits a big nail on the head too inside the chat that security is a primary reason. Um, I think 100%. We're realizing where the pros and cons are sitting in the cloud, right? Especially when it comes to security and what new vulnerabilities that opens up, what doors that shuts, and then figuring out where we're going to sit, right? But that being said, I still say the biggest problem we have with security is in between the chair and the keyboard. I don't care who
Yes,
you are.
totally. Awesome. We've hit a lot of points. Maybe one more we can hit, Joe. That we've kind of alluded to a little bit. Is cost and pricing of the cloud. You
Yeah,
want to
so
chat
I
about that a little bit?
yeah, so I think this is like of everything that we've talked about where we've talked about challenges, I think we all get the benefits that go with accessibility, the benefits that go with the security side of the house, right? The benefits that come with education, right? End users being more flexible, the benefits that come to productivity and the like. Pricing, I think, is the one where there's the most gray area, right? I come with depending on the organization you're working with, it may be cheaper, right? Which is going to be a benefit. It may be much more expensive because they're spinning up a new environment from scratch, right? The manpower going into pricing and that kind of deal. But when I look at the singular pricing challenge that I had, again, I'm Microsoft centric, is I'd ask Microsoft what my pricing is going to be, and they had problems telling me, right? But it wasn't just Microsoft. I was going through a reseller who was going to Microsoft, and there were 2 other layers on top of me that, like, if I'm using, um, uh, you know, storage in Azure, I need to be able to track my pricing for my end users, right? It's incredibly difficult to go to an end user and say, "Month over month, your Azure billing is going to change. That's why my bill is going to go up and down." Right? So we've got one of 2 options. You can either let me continue to manage it, or we can put your credit card in there, and you can manage the pricing, right? And that's always a very difficult conversation and challenge to have, right? Predictive pricing, I think, is always a difficulty when we look at managing this. But going back to pricing itself within the cloud, I think one of the benefits is you can be as cost effective or as cost ineffective as you would like to be, right? I I had one of the clients that I worked with is was incredibly cost conscious, right? And I very much like the fact that I could keep everything in the cloud set up to run on the bare minimums of what it needed. Sure, there was still some fluctuation in there and predictive pricing was difficult, but I was able to set up the cloud so that their costs would be as low as possible, and they were thoroughly happy for that. I had another client who was very cost conscious, right? They just wanted the best bang for their buck resource wise, and I was able to set up that within their cloud account as well. So having that type of flexibility to be able to provide a very, and let's be honest, very expensive service as an MSP, but build the cost efficiencies that your clients need in there was quite nice. I will say that was always a benefit to me.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that specifically within AWS, I'm sure all these cloud platforms they advertise elasticity, right? So your infrastructure can grow as needed if you have a server that needs to auto scale up. But this can sometimes be, as you're alluding to a little bit, an issue because you could scale your pricing quite high too. And one question, Joe, I wanted to get your angle on. Um, you mentioned earlier asking Microsoft about pricing, or perhaps somebody working with Microsoft, and they couldn't even tell you. I found AWS pricing to also be similarly complex. I don't mean to be a conspiracy theorist, but do you think that this is on purpose to abstract
I
away this pricing?
I actually don't think it's on purpose to kind of add another conspiracy to this.
Sure.
I think it's we have organizations that are large to the point that they just don't care, right? And not to say that AWS or Azure or any of these other large cloud providers are actively trying to not care. I think it's very much of a I'm going to listen to my largest clients as a business and I'm going to make decisions off of where to move from them, which is what any business is going to do to a point, right? If if I'm Microsoft and I've got Amazon, IBM, and pick another large organization. I'm listening to what they need over, the small to medium enterprise businesses. Um, and I think when I'm looking at these larger clients, they're able to they're able to look at the elasticity and the movement in pricing and go, "It doesn't affect me," right? Now, that being said, it could also go the other way around, right? Where, to your point, it's I don't want to say it's malicious, but it's made over complex so that you're kind of stuck, right? I
Lock in.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
because like
Yeah, it's
I
a
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to highlight Andrew's comment here. Disagree. I think it's 100% made over complex. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you make some good points that were similar to the ones earlier about MSPs need kind of stability for their clients, but these large, the top three Azure, AWS, GCP, they can change quickly because they have their clients, their large clients, have huge teams to manage some of this stuff. But yeah, at times it almost seems like you need a degree in like physics to decode
Oh,
AWS
yeah.
pricing and like what something's going to cost, what it cost last month. And that's where I see the market a little bit. I think getting super frustrated. Um, but curious if you've seen the same or yeah.
Oh, 100%. Everybody's getting frustrated with it. And I would say, if next year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years down the line, right, we look back at this and I completely eat my words that it wasn't just them going, "My largest clients don't care. I don't have to care," right? That becomes very damaging because now I look at that and go, "Okay, what you're doing is now maliciously over complicating your pricing to drive small vendors away from you," right? And when I look at Microsoft especially, like, I don't know how many of us as MSPs ever became a direct CSP. I've talked to, like, 5, right? And they were Microsoft vendors before MSP was even a term, right? Back when it was, just hardware and software sales or VAR services, right? Like, that's where I'm seeing direct CSPs coming from. I've seen Microsoft over the past few years make it more difficult to become a direct CSP. I think the level of spend here is to be a direct CSP, I think it's 500,000 a month, right? That's a lot.
Wait, five grand
Or
or
500
what
k
was it?
500K a year, excuse
Five
me, I
hundred
think it
k.
is.
Oh, it's
I'd
more
have to
revenue.
look it up,
Wow.
but
But
that
within the scale of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
right, yeah, and
Yeah,
that's rough for MSPs. We're stuck being indirect CSPs now, which means we have to go through a reseller, right? It's like they're protecting the middleman over us. Meanwhile, we're the ones who handle the majority of the workforce, right?
for sure.
So,
Yeah, it's interesting. Oh, Noah's commenting. I think it's more than 500K now.
okay, so it
Yeah,
went up since like last month.
insane. Yeah, when I think about cloud costs a little bit, you made a point that what they're doing is driving small vendors away. And maybe that's the intent, maybe not. I somehow feel better that it's not just as to the goal isn't to extract as much value from every customer as possible, and maybe it is to drive small vendors away. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Maybe we also need a PhD in cloud economics, but it'd be interesting to find out and look back. Cool. Joe, how are we feeling? Should we wrap up here? We've got a lot of great community engagement. I think we could go on all afternoon ranting about cloud and costs, but I think we're getting close here. Just highlighting a few more comments from Noah. It makes sense. No, it's not stressful. He's away. Maybe we'll bring you back on and have go deeper into pricing or one of these discussions. But
Definitely would be happy to do so.
Cool. All right, pitch time. Joe, where can folks learn more about Enable's cloud offerings and where can they reach out to you?
So you guys can reach out to me, joseph.ferla@enable.com. Feel free to email me. One of the nice things about being a head nerd is, while yes, I do have to be a little Enable biased, I'm not here for Enable, I'm here for the market. One of the things we've been adopting at Enable is healthy market equals healthy vendor. So if you guys go to our portal, which is me.enable.com, whether or not you're an Enable partner, you guys will find access to our learning center, right, called Enable U, which will give you automation boot camps. It'll give you office hours you can join, though those are a little more product specific. We've got our automation cookbook. Right now, it's over 800 scripts that you guys can pull down from our automation cookbook if you guys need it. We've got Market Builder up there. It's a digital marketing platform, right? So if you guys want to get in touch with Enable, that's where I always say start. If you're already a Enable partner, get in touch with your PSM if I just mentioned some resources that you're not using. If you want to get in touch with me as an Enable partner, again, you've got my email. You can find me on LinkedIn at Joe Ferla, and you can find me on Reddit as Head Nerd Joe. Um, if we need to trial any of our products, specifically Cloud Commander, and you want to look at that, I believe I saw the link for just a second there in the feed, but me.enable.com, products, and you'll find Cloud Commander. You'll also see a boot camp coming up for that within the next couple weeks. Where if you want to see how we handle the tool and a couple of our use cases before maybe trialing, you're more than welcome to join the boot camp. Um,
Fan- Fantastic, Joe. Thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure chatting with the folks at Enable, head nerds that are very objective on their subject matters, very oftentimes outclassing me with just wells of knowledge. So again, we super appreciate it. We do this about once a month. I guess until next time, we'll call it there. Thanks so much, Joe. See ya.
it was a pleasure. Bye.